Imagine for a second that your mind is a mirror, just a completely blank, polished piece of glass.
Okay.
If you place that mirror on the side of a really busy highway, what does it reflect?
Chaos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just a high-speed blur of cars and noise.
Exactly. Just constant jarring motion.
Yeah.
But if you take that exact same mirror and place it in front of a still remote mountain lake, it reflects absolute tranquility.
Right.
The mirror itself didn't change at all, but its entire reality, its entire identity in that moment was totally dictated by what was put in front of it.
Yeah, its environment defined it.
So what if I told you that the mirror could eventually learn how to stop just reflecting the lake and actually start, I don't know, building the mountain?
Oh, wow. That's quite a leap.
Right. And that is exactly the journey we are taking on today's deep dive. We are unpacking a truly fascinating text titled The Chapter of Preaching Tao, Article 45.
Specifically, the dialectics of mind and form. Yes, written by the philosopher Xuefeng back in 2008. The mission for us today is to map out the evolution of human consciousness exactly as it's described in this single source text. We're going to trace a path from a chaotic, reactive mind that is completely dictated by the outside world, all the way to an ultimate state where the mind actively creates its own reality.
Quite a trajectory.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because, starting with a philosophical text from 2008 might sound a bit academic, but the mechanics it describes hit incredibly close to home for anyone trying to navigate modern life.
I mean, it functions as a highly practical manual.
Yeah.
We spend so much of our time trying to fix our anxiety, our stress, or, our lack of focus by treating the mind as if it exists in a vacuum.
Right, like if we just meditate hard enough, we can fix everything inside.
Exactly. We think we can just change our attitude and fix our internal state. But Xuefeng's text flips that assumption completely on its head. It provides this framework to see how deeply tethered our consciousness is to the external structures around us.
Which the text refers to as form or phenomenon, right?
Yeah. It forces us to examine the actual feedback loop between what we look at and what we become.
And the premise, it starts with, it honestly stopped me in my tracks because it goes against so much of Western individualism.
Oh, definitely.
The very first line establishes the baseline of human existence by stating, humans are originally without mind. The mind arises from form.
It's such a bold claim.
It is. The text explains that form is phenomenon. It's anything you interact with, physically or conceptually. And without a specific form, there is literally no corresponding mind.
Right.
It uses some very grounded examples to illustrate this. It points out that without the form of a computer, there is no computer mind. Without the form of parents, there is no parental mind.
Yeah, your identity doesn't just exist independently waiting to be expressed. It is actually summoned into existence by the things you engage with.
So it's not something I inherently have.
Well, what the author is arguing is that your conscious experience at any given moment is entirely dependent on the phenomena you are perceiving. What's fascinating here is that if your five senses sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, if they perceive no form, there is no mind for them to generate.
Wow.
Myriad forms give rise to myriad minds. So if you are sitting on a beach looking at a beautiful sunset, your mind naturally takes on the shape of that sunset. It becomes expansive and calm.
And if I'm staring at a stressful, convoluted spreadsheet at work?
Then your mind essentially becomes that spreadsheet. It becomes rigid, analytical, and tense.
Which brings us right back to the mirror on the highway. This is where the text gets incredibly descriptive, almost poetic, really, about the trap we all fall into every single day.
Oh, the mundane world section.
Yes. It says that when forms change constantly and the mind follows those rapid changes, it creates chaos.
Yeah.
The direct quote describes this state as making one like a wandering soul, lost and lamenting.
Lost and lamenting.
The mind becomes restless, like having a thief nearby. And because of this constant chasing of changing forms, a person becomes an ordinary, worldly person trapped in the mundane world. Reading that, my brain immediately went to doom scrolling on social media.
Oh, absolutely. It's the perfect modern equivalent.
You open an app, and every single post is a new, rapidly changing form. 1 second, you're reading a tragic news story, so your mind takes the shape of tragedy. You scroll.
And suddenly it's a completely different vibe.
Right. The next second, it's a funny dog video. And your mind is forced to jerk into amusement. You scroll again. Now it's an influencer making you feel inadequate about your lifestyle, and your mind immediately shifts to insecurity.
Your mind is being jerked in 100 different emotional directions in the span of 3 minutes.
It leaves you exhausted, scattered, and literally feeling like a thief just stole your peace and your attention. You become the wandering soul.
It is a brilliant diagnosis of everyday modern anxiety and is written before the algorithm truly took over our lives.
Hmm.
We often treat our mental exhaustion as a personal failure.
Yeah, we tell ourselves we just aren't resilient enough or we lack discipline.
Exactly. But the text points out that this is a mathematical structural reality.
Yep.
If your mind is fundamentally tethered to external forms, and you immerse yourself in an environment where forms are designed to change constantly and rapidly, you will inevitably be thrown into chaos.
It's just simple cause and effect.
Yeah. As the text says, as forms change, the mind follows. When forms change frequently, the mind becomes chaotic. You fall into that mundane world, not because you are mentally weak, but because you are allowing a chaotic world to dictate the shape of your consciousness.
Okay, so if the mundane state is endlessly reacting to the world like a ping pong ball, the natural question is, how do we stop reacting?
Right. And the text lays out a clear progression, an ascension of consciousness. The next level up from the worldly person is what the text calls the sage.
So what makes the sage different?
For the sage, the external forms still change, but the mind does not turn with them. The heart remains steadfast with the Tao, as Yufeng writes.
Okay, we should probably clarify what the Tao means in this context for everyone.
Good point. The Tao generally refers to the fundamental, underlying natural order or flow of the universe. It is the unchangeable truth beneath the changing surface. So, when the sage's heart remains steadfast with the Tao, it means they have anchored their consciousness to that deep, underlying current.
Rather than getting tossed around by the waves on the surface.
Exactly.
The imagery used here is really striking. It says, flowers bloom and fall, clouds roll and disperse, meaning the external world is still doing its thing. The changing forms haven't stopped.
Right. Life is still happening, full of beauty and tragedy.
But no matter how varied those forms are, the sage's mind remains calm and clear, like the bright sun and moon. They simply don't chase the forms anymore. They've stopped scrolling, so to speak, even while the feed keeps updating.
The sage has fundamentally detached their internal mirror from the highway. The cars are still driving by at 80 miles an hour, but the mirror is angled up at the sky. It isn't reflecting the chaos.
I love that visual.
But the progression in the text doesn't stop at mere observation. It moves from the sage to the celestial being, which is a massive psychological leap.
Okay.
The sage simply remains calm when forms change. The celestial being, however, actually begins to transform forms with the mind.
Now, this is where I need to play devil's advocate and push back a bit, because the descriptions of the celestial being really made me pause.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text claims that for the celestial being, darkness becomes dawn, winding paths become straight roads, and suffering turns into sweetness. It says that what is pleasant becomes more pleasant, and even discomfort becomes pleasant. I really struggle with this.
It sounds a bit extreme, yeah.
Well, yeah. Looking at the sage first, is the sage just emotionally suppressed? Like flowers fall, clouds disperse, whatever. I feel absolutely nothing. And then for the celestial being, isn't turning suffering into sweetness just a textbook definition of toxic positivity? Like, is it just being delusional about reality? If you break your leg, it hurts. If you lose your job, it's terrifying. Calling those things sweetness feels like you're just gaslighting yourself to avoid dealing with the pain.
I completely hear that. And honestly, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's the most common trap people fall into when interpreting Eastern philosophy through a modern hyper-individualized lens.
Okay, so where am I getting it wrong?
Let's tackle the celestial being first. Because if we look closely at the text, it provides the exact mechanism that prevents this from being toxic positivity. The key phrase in that section is understanding the essence of forms.
So what does the essence of forms actually mean in practice?
Well, toxic positivity is slapping a fake, happy sticker over a deep wound and pretending it doesn't hurt. It's a complete denial of reality.
Right, which is what I was worried about.
But what the text is describing is actually the ultimate acceptance of reality. When you deeply understand the essence of forms, you realize that all phenomena are transient. They are temporary and ultimately neutral until human consciousness attaches meaning to them.
Okay.
So your internal relationship to adversity fundamentally changes. The celestial being isn't pretending a broken leg doesn't physically hurt. The nervous system is still firing.
The pain is real.
Yes.
Yeah.
But because they understand the transient essence of that pain, they don't add the secondary heavy layer of psychological suffering. They don't spiral into, why me? This is ruining my life. My future is over.
Ah, I see.
The physical discomfort remains, But the mind's relationship to it is so unthreatened, so peaceful, that they genuinely find a profound sweetness even in the vulnerability of enduring it. They are playing celestial melodies daily, not because they are ignoring reality, but because they are no longer terrified by it.
Oh, wow. So the suffering isn't magically erased, but the meaning attached to the suffering is entirely rewritten by the mind. You stop taking the changing forms personally.
Precisely. And that answers your question about the sage being emotionally suppressed too. It's not that the sage doesn't feel the tragedy of the falling flower. It's that they are no longer yanked around by what they feel.
Right.
They observe the blooming and the falling of the flowers with equal appreciation for the cycle of life. They feel deeply, but they don't cling.
Okay, so if the celestial being can rewrite the meaning of bad into good, what happens when you no longer just want to interpret what's already there, but you want to build something entirely new? That brings us to the final, ultimate peak described in the text, the super celestial being. Here, the mind doesn't just transform reality, it actively creates it.
Yes, creating forms with the mind makes one a super celestial being.
And the text leans heavily into a classic piece of Buddhist philosophy to explain this. It brings in the famous concept, emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. But I think it's easy to misunderstand that word, right? Emptiness doesn't mean a dark void or a vacuum.
No, not at all. In this philosophical context, emptiness means that things lack a permanent, independent essence. A wooden chair is just wood, which was a tree, which was water and sunlight.
It's empty of being inherently forever a chair.
Exactly. Because forms are empty of permanent meaning, the text says they arise entirely from the mind. For the supercelestial being, wherever this mind creates, there are green mountains and clear waters, with absolutely no attachments, fears, or worries.
It is the ultimate state of liberation. You are no longer interpreting the world. Your consciousness is the literal architect of your experiential reality. Because you know the chair is just water and sunlight, you aren't devastated when it breaks. You just see the wood returning to the earth.
Right. You are entirely free from the form.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though. With this ultimate architectural power comes two incredibly dangerous traps. The text doesn't just paint a utopian picture. It outlines the pitfalls at this high level of consciousness. The first major trap is what it calls forms of dharma.
And dharma, in this specific context, essentially means the established rules, doctrines, or the proper ways of doing things.
Right. And the text warns that if the mind creates forms of dharma, it becomes a constraint. It argues that dharma sets no rigid rules, it is ever-changing. It uses this fantastic quote, 30 years on the east bank of the river, 30 years on the west bank.
Which is such a great idiom.
Yeah. It means times change. Contexts change. If you cling to forms of dharma, if you rigidly stick to the rules of yesterday, it leads to death. But freedom from these forms leads to flexibility and vividness.
That phrase about the river perfectly captures impermanence. Rivers naturally change their course over time due to erosion and flooding. What used to be the fertile east bank might become the barren west bank in a few decades.
So you have to adapt.
Exactly. If you build your house and your entire livelihood strictly based on where the river was 30 years ago and refuse to move when the water shifts, you are going to drown.
It so reminds me of the classic business downfall. Imagine a highly successful corporate executive who memorized the entire 1990s rule book for how to run a company. They know the forms of dharma perfectly.
They built their house on the east bank.
Exactly. But then the internet era arrives. The river completely changes course. If they cling to that 1990s rulebook, their forms of dharma, it leads to the death of their company. Their rigid adherence to what used to be the rules becomes their downfall. They have to let go of the doctrine to remain flexible and vivid in the new era.
But the text immediately warns about the opposite extreme too. If sticking too rigidly to the rules is a trap, completely abandoning all boundaries is equally dangerous. The second trap is harboring forms of non-dharma.
It says that harboring non-dharma leads to arrogance and the path of demons. If you desire beyond all bounds, you create constant conflict. The text warns that even if you possess miraculous powers, you will suffer in hell.
This is the brilliant paradox Xu introduces. To reach ultimate freedom as a super celestial, you have to walk an impossibly thin tightrope.
Okay, paint that picture for me.
On one side, you have forms of dharma, dogmatic, rigid rules that suffocate you and lead to a kind of spiritual or intellectual death. You become a rigid fossil.
Right.
But if you reject all structure and adopt the form of non-dharma, saying, there are absolutely no rules, I am the ultimate creator, I can do whatever I want without consequence,
Well, that unbounded arrogance puts you in constant conflict with the natural universe. You become a demon suffering in a hell of your own making, constantly fighting against everything because you refuse to respect the interconnected boundaries of reality.
So you have to find that center path between extreme rigidity and extreme chaos.
Exactly.
But, as I was reading this final section, I kept tripping over an apparent flaw in the core argument, like a blatant contradiction.
Really? What part?
In the very first section, the text explicitly states the mind arises from form. Without form, there is no mind. Form dictates the mind.
Right, we talked about that. But here in the final section, the supercelestial being creates forms with the mind. So, which is it? Does the world create the mind, or does the mind create the world? It can't be both.
Well, Xu Feng actually anticipates this pushback directly. He writes, "What has been said above may seem contradictory."
Oh, he admits it.
He does. And his answer to this contradiction is arguably the most profound part of the essay. He says that whether it appears contradictory or not depends entirely on your realm of understanding. In a confined space, contradictions are everywhere. But if you look from what he calls a holographic perspective, there is absolutely no contradiction.
A holographic perspective. Okay, how does a hologram resolve this chicken or egg problem?
Think about the physics of a traditional hologram. If you take a standard photograph, let's say a picture of an apple, and you cut that photograph in half, you only have half an apple. You've lost information.
Right, obviously.
But a hologram doesn't work like that. Because of how laser light interference patterns are recorded, every single tiny piece of a holographic plate contains the image of the entire whole.
Wait, really?
Yeah. If you shatter a holographic plate into 20 pieces and shine a laser through just one tiny shard, you will still see the entire, complete apple. You can't separate the parts from the whole.
So form and mind aren't two separate things sitting on opposite sides of a room shouting at each other.
Exactly. They aren't a linear equation where A causes B. They are the exact same material viewed from different angles. The text explains the final mechanics of this reality by stating, the way of the mind is consciousness, and the way of form is structure.
The way of the mind is consciousness, and the way of form is structure.
And here's the mechanism that ties it all together. The text says, as they reverse and cycle, energy follows. When you change the structure of your life, you are simultaneously changing your mind because they are cut from the same holographic cloth.
So what does this all mean for the listener? How do you actually take this abstract idea of a holographic perspective where consciousness and structure are cycling and, apply it to a Tuesday morning at the office? Especially because the text ends with this incredibly urgent, almost ominous line.
Oh, about the gate closing.
Yes. It says, the gate of Chanyuan is about to close, leaving this one method for you to play with. What is Chanyuan and what is this one method?
Well, this raises an important question. Chanyuan in Sui Feng's philosophy refers to a specific spiritual community or a higher state of harmonious existence. When he says the gate is about to close, he is injecting a sense of mortal urgency. Life is short. The window to wake up is closing.
Okay, that makes sense.
The one method he leaves us with is the conscious recognition of that infinite feedback loop. Yes, the structures around you, your demanding job, your noisy city, your complex relationships, they absolutely shape your consciousness. That is undeniable. But your consciousness, once awakened to this holographic reality, can begin making deliberate choices that reshape those structures.
The reverse and cycle.
Exactly. If you feel like a wandering soul right now, constantly anxious, the holographic perspective tells you to look at the structures you are interacting with. Stop trying to out-meditate a toxic environment. Change the structure, change the form, and your mind will naturally follow. Once your mind is calmer, more like the sage, you can use that stabilized consciousness to proactively build better structures in your life, stepping into the role of the celestial being. Energy follows the cycle. You stop being a passive victim of circumstance, waiting for the world to make you happy, and you become an active participant in the creation of your reality.
It's an incredibly empowering framework once you get past the initial abstraction, which brings this entire journey directly back to you, our listener. Whether you clicked play today feeling like that wandering soul, stressed out by a world that just won't stop throwing new forms at you, or whether you are actively trying to be that celestial being shaping your career, your family, and your life, you now possess this ancient, brilliantly articulated blueprint. You understand the profound looping dialectic between your mind and the phenomena around you. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final puzzle to chew on, something that builds on the very first section of this text, where Xu Feng wrote, without the form of parents, there is no parental mind. Without the form of the world, there is no world mind.
The idea that your internal identity is summoned by the external roles you play.
Yes. So I want to ask you, if your internal identity, your mind, is entirely dependent on the external forms you interact with, who are you when those forms disappear? Think about it practically. When you finally retire from your job and lose the form of your career, or when your kids grow up and leave the house and the everyday form of active parenting is suddenly gone, when those external structures vanish, does a part of your mind cease to exist? Or is your mirror simply wiped clean, waiting in the stillness for an entirely new form to be born? It's a question worth exploring the next time you find yourself staring into the glass, wondering what exactly is looking back. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the dialectics of mind and form. Keep questioning the reality around you, keep shaping your energy, and we will catch you on the next one.